Thank you so much. It was a very generous introduction. I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm one of the things that are keeping you from dinner, so I'm going to try to be merciful in terms of length of comments and just try to highlight a few things. First of all, I just want to thank President Awalia and of course Ambassador Sandhu and Consul General Assem, and it's Majan. It's so nice to see you. What's really nice is, I've been talking, wringing hands with Mayor Turner and County Judge Hidalgo and Representative Sheila Jackson-Lee and Al Green, Rodney Ellis and Adrian Garcia and Council Member Ramsey for the last 2 years, but I haven't actually seen them. I mean, it's all been virtual. I feel like we're embedded in a computer someplace. So the fact that I actually got to hug a few of them tonight is just so nice, and it really feels good, and it's so good to see everybody. And it is an honor for me to be able to address the Chamber of Commerce tonight. I'm trying to stand on the side of this because over the years I've noticed somebody of my stature, when you stand behind the podium, all you see is podium. So I'm trying to be a little bit more out in front as much as I can, because I do want to briefly tell a very interesting story about something that's very special that's happening between our Texas Medical Center and the people of India. And I want to report upon what I call our shared unique commitment to global health and the world's poverty-related neglected diseases. More than a decade ago, it's gone by very quickly. A decade and a few months, I moved with my family and a group of a dozen or more scientists to Houston with a vision to tackle the most common afflictions of the world's poor. So, as mentioned, I'm an MD, PhD pediatrician scientist who's devoted my life to developing new vaccines and preventative treatments for this very interesting group of afflictions called the neglected tropical diseases. They're the most common afflictions of the world's poor. So right now, there are 750 million people in the world who live on no money. The World Bank doesn't call it that. They say it lives below the World Bank poverty figure of $1.90 a day, but you know what that means. It means they live on no money. And essentially all of them, every one of those 750 million people are infected with schistosomiasis and hookworm infection and Chagas disease. And we're trying to provide access for first-generation interventions that are now reaching more than 1 billion people annually. And now we're developing vaccines for these conditions to really make them go away. And they're interesting vaccines because they're not only going to affect and improve health, but also lift people out of poverty. So one of these diseases called female genital schistosomiasis, you probably never heard of it. It's the most common gynecologic condition on the African continent. 40 million girls and women living in poverty are affected by it. We're making that vaccine. And they cause chronic disabilities. They make people too sick to go to work. They destroy lives. They impair child development, particularly reproductive health. And because of that, they trap people in poverty. So by making a vaccine for these diseases, you're not only going to improve health, but lift them out of poverty. Hence this term anti-poverty vaccines. In our group, the Texas Children's Center for Vaccine Development, which is just a few blocks from here, it's located in the Feigen Research Center of the Texas Children's Hospital. It's a major research arm of our National School of Tropical Medicine, which I started here at Baylor College of Medicine and the Texas Medical Center in 2010, which in itself is kind of an interesting story. I've trained at some of the best universities. I've been at Yale and Harvard and Cornell and Rockefeller. I said, I want to start a tropical medicine school, and they said, you can't do that. And because, the universities in the Northeast, they're wonderful institutions, but they've been around since the Pleistocene era, and they have a set way of doing things, and they become a bit ossified. And I came down here to the Texas Medical Center. I said, I want to start a school of tropical medicine. They said, okay. And this is one of the very cool things about Houston. I get very emotional about this. I say this is one of the I think last place is in the United States, maybe anywhere where you could still pursue the old-fashioned American dream, where if you're willing to work hard and have a passion for it, you can do it. And I think the other really interesting thing about Houston that I found, and people don't believe me when I say it, Houstonians are the most intellectually curious group of people I've ever met. Maybe because we're all here because we want to do something big. And when you tell people you want to start a school of tropical medicine, they say, what's that? And they're like sponges. They want to absorb, they want to learn, they want to know. It's a really, truly wonderful aspect of the people of Houston. And, our team of scientists includes experts in fermentation and chemical engineering related to bioprocess development, which is not something you think about when you think about a medical school. And I know we have many outstanding engineers here in the audience. Ultimately, making vaccines is as much an engineering challenge as anything else. And we're working to realize the concept of science and engineering for humanitarian purposes, something I've termed science tikkun, based on the ancient Hebrew concept of tikkun olam, to repair the world. Now, aside from our neglected tropical disease anti-poverty vaccines, after we first relocated from Houston, Texas, from Washington, D.C., we also embarked on developing vaccines for another group of orphaned or neglected tropical diseases known as coronavirus infections. And at the time in 2010, nobody cared about coronavirus infections. And so we began developing vaccines for SARS, severe acute respiratory syndrome, that, if you remember, it arose out of southern China in 2010. It hit Toronto very hard, but otherwise didn't have a big impact, and Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. And that work led to the study showing that the spike protein of the coronavirus is a promising target. And then we showed how to produce the spike protein at scale, how to deliver it to the immune response, and induce high levels of protective virus neutralizing antibodies. All of that work over the last decade has led to this current generation of vaccines. And so when the sequence of the SARS-2 coronavirus came online in January 2020, our team of scientists was able to pivot our coronavirus vaccine work towards COVID-19 and make that vaccine. But it's a different type of vaccine from the one you're familiar with. Unlike mRNA vaccines or adenovirus vectored vaccines, which work well, but which cannot be made in the billions, ours can. So remember the scope of the problem. There are more than 1 billion people in sub-Saharan Africa who need to be vaccinated. There's another 650 million people in Latin America, another 1 billion people in the smaller low-income Asian countries. That's 3 billion people. We need 9 billion doses of vaccines, and we don't need it by 2023 or 2024. We need it now. And here's the problem. It's simply not possible to make 9 billion doses of mRNA or adenovirus vectored vaccines. As any engineer will tell you, and I know there are many here tonight, there's a learning curve to go from 0 to 9 billion. It doesn't matter whether they're new vaccines or widgets. Any new technology takes time. And so what I was very troubled about when the mRNA and adenovirus vectored vaccines came out, and I was the beneficiary of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. I got it, and I'm grateful. But I said, it's going to take years to learn how to make 9 billion of them. So what are we going to do now? And so our vaccine is an old school vaccine. It uses an older yeast fermentation technology that's similar to the one used to make the recombinant protein hepatitis B vaccine that's made and used all over the world, including low and middle income countries. And by the way, that's what you gave to your kids and your grandkids. But we needed a manufacturing partner who could do this and do it well, do it under a quality umbrella, quality control, quality assurance, because that's the problem with making a vaccine. Anybody can actually make a vaccine, but to do it with that quality umbrella, that's the hard part. So who would make that vaccine? And the answer, of course, is India. Not many people know the story, except the ambassador, but India provides more vaccines for the world's low and middle income countries, vaccines for diseases such as measles or whooping cough or tetanus, than any other nation. Over the decades, it's No, it really is one of the greatest stories ever told. Over the decades, India's largest vaccine producers, such as the Serum Institute of India in Pune, or Biological E and Bharat Biotech in Hyderabad, have established this very unique ecosystem needed to make vaccines for the world's low and middle income countries. I call this India's gift to the world. It really is. And thank you. Naturally, so we were thrilled when we got connected to Biological E in Hyderabad through our mutual colleagues at PATH, the Program for Appropriate Technology for Health based in Seattle, which does a lot of work with the Gates Foundation. And without the need of patents, no patents, we transferred our production cell bank to Biological E and then began exchanging reagents and knowledge, speaking literally every day by Zoom or by phone. So I haven't slept in 2 years because, you know, the time difference to Hyderabad? It's awful. I mean, 6 a.m., 7 a.m. Zoom calls. And then when they're ready to start work, of course, it's in the middle of the night here. But we did it. We worked together to develop that vaccine. And in clinical trials in Hyderabad and elsewhere in India, the vaccine looks great, offering protection that looks as good as potentially the mRNA vaccines, but a fraction of the price. Because by only making vaccines for global health, our health economists, and we've worked with them, told us, hey, Peter, if you want to make a schistosomiasis vaccine for female genital schistosomiasis, it's got to be under $2 a dose. And same with our hookworm vaccine, same with our Chagas vaccine. So that's all we know how to do is make cheap vaccines. So this COVID-19 vaccine is priced at $1.50 a dose. And simple refrigeration, easy to administer, and in short, it checks all the boxes needed for global health and resource-poor settings. And now the vaccine will be released for emergency use authorization. And India, we think any day now. So we're waiting maybe by the end of this month or early in November. And our good friends and colleagues at Biological E are scaling it at 100 million doses per month. That's the other thing India and Texas shares. We only do big things, right? So 100 million doses a month. And the Indian government has just announced they will make an advance purchase of 300 million doses. And so that's going on now. And so what's happening, which is both sad and interesting, is every week now I'm contacted by a minister of science or a minister of health in a low and middle income country. Why? Because they have no vaccine. They were told mRNA vaccines were coming, adenovirus vectored vaccines are coming. They're not coming, and they never were, because they were never going to be able to scale them at that level. But we can with ours. And so now with no patents, we're only doing this not to make money, but we want to vaccinate the world in the coming months. Now, one of our early problems was that we lacked the funds to launch this project, in part because the US government in Operation Warp Speed was really fixated on speed and innovation. Whether or not you can make it for the world was never really an issue. It was speed and innovation to vaccinate the American people as fast as you can, and they did that. But now the rest of the world, the entire southern hemisphere, is without vaccine. So this was a huge issue for me, and it was very tough in those first few months of the pandemic. One, I was going on CNN and MSNBC every day delivering, horrible news. I actually cried twice in front of Breonna Keeler, so there's something about her that makes me cry. I don't know what it is. But it was really sad, and then we couldn't raise money because we were cut out of Operation Warp Speed, and everybody was focused on speed and innovation. But back when I was an undergraduate at Yale, I bought a copy of The Essential Gandhi, written by Louis Fisher, who was a journalist. And I still have it in my office to this day. It's all dog-eared, everything is underlined. And Gandhi once said, "My experience has taught me that no movement ever stops for languishes for lack of funds. This does not mean that any movement could go on without money, but it does mean that wherever it has good men, and I would add, and women, and true at its helm, it's bound to attract to itself the requisite funds." So we had that going for us. But he was right. He was absolutely right. And you know who came through? The Texas-based philanthropies. In addition to support from Texas Children's Hospital, we received help from the Clayburgh Foundation, Tito's vodka. So if you order a cocktail tonight with vodka, you're getting it with Tito's vodka. Um, uh, Tito's been amazing. The Dunn Foundation, the MD Anderson Foundation, as well as help from the JPB Foundation in New York and others. We raised $7 million here in Texas in a hurry. And that would never have happened otherwise. And so our modest-sized research institute here in Texas is making the people's vaccine for the world, supported by Texas philanthropy. So a point here is that if we had not moved to Texas, there would be no low-cost people's vaccine for COVID-19. As I say, we came here to the Texas Medical Center in Houston because this is the place where you do big things. And it's a side of Texas that few people back east know, or on the West Coast. And you know how we're portrayed on the news, on the cable news networks. We're portrayed as being sort of backwards or lacking education. But this is one of the fun things about going on, is to tell that story of Texas, that Texas is a science powerhouse, and some of the world's most important scientific discoveries, cures, and vaccines and medical devices were conceived right here in our Texas Medical Center. So now, together with BioE, our vaccine center has accelerated the development, production, and delivery of this new low-cost COVID-19 vaccine, and our shared goal is to make the vaccine available not only for India, but also for all of the world's low and middle income countries as a means to end the pandemic. So this is the good news of the story. But making for the vaccines for the world is not without its challenges, and some of which I've never expected. And I'll just finish up with this one piece, which is that in addition to being a vaccine scientist, I've been married to Anne for 34 years. I'm sorry she's not here tonight. She was with the event yesterday. And we're the parents of 4 adult children, including that 2 who live here in Houston. So my son Dan is a petroleum engineer who now works on the financial side at Evercore, just a few blocks away from here in downtown Houston. And by the way, they work you pretty hard at Evercore. I'm sure he's working now. And my youngest daughter, Rachel, is 28 years old and has autism and intellectual disabilities. And a few years back, I wrote the book, Vaccines Did Not Cause Rachel's Autism, to counter a rising crescendo of pseudoscience and anti-vaccine activities, which are unfortunately centered right here in Houston. And I'm sorry, not here in Houston, it's centered right here in Texas. So that although Texas is a scientific horsepower, it's also sadly now the epicenter of the anti-vaccine movement in America. In fact, I've been so effective at countering this anti-vaccine aggression that I now have a name from the anti-vaccine groups. They call me the OG villain, which I had to look up. It means the original gangster villain. So Consul General, you've invited the OG villain to address this group tonight. Now in 2020 and 2021, we saw science and scientists challenged or even threatened like never before. A massive anti-vaccine disinformation campaign attached itself to political extremism with deadly consequences. Thousands of Americans have lost their lives this past summer until now, with more than 100,000 COVID-19 deaths from May to June until now because of this Delta variant and the fact that they weren't vaccinated despite the widespread availability of vaccines. Think of that. Between 1,000 and 2,000 Americans are losing their lives every day since late in the spring and the summer because they were falsely told that taking ivermectin was just as good, or that vaccines were only political instruments of control, or that vaccines were a little more, these are quotes, a little more than a mechanism to get their foot in your door, because then they're going to take away your guns and your Bibles. Now, as ridiculous as that sounds to us, there's a quarter or a third of the country that actually believes this garbage. And these are actual comments from elected members of the United States Congress and some of the governors. And moreover, these comments are repeated nightly on some of the conservative news outlets. And at first, we called this misinformation, then disinformation, to reflect intent, but I call it what it really is. This is anti-science aggression, and it's a killer. Anti-science aggression has killed more Americans in recent months, including 10,000 Texans this summer and fall, than global terrorism, cyber attacks, nuclear proliferation, and other big-picture global threats combined. And in an article published in the Public Library of Science entitled Anti-Science Kills, I compare what is happening today to when Stalin purged both science and scientists in order to exert authoritarian control. He subjugated evolutionary genetics in favor of Lysenko's phony concepts of vernalization, and that resulted in catastrophic agricultural practices leading to the deaths of hundreds of thousands of peasants from starvation in the Soviet Union during the 1930s and 40s. He also sentenced prominent scientists such as Vavilov to starve in Soviet gulags. Now, clearly what's happening today is by no means compares to those atrocities of the mid-20th century, but you get the idea. Science is under attack, as is our scientists. The other night, I got a call from a colleague, Dr. Hotez, turn on Fox News. I said, why? He said, because Laura Ingraham and Governor DeSantis of Florida are going after you. I said, what? I turn it on, and sure enough, the two are attacking me. And I'm looking at this as the governor of Florida. I'm a professor at Texas. I mean, why is the governor of Florida going after? I mean, I've been to Florida. I took the kids to Disney World when they were little. But it's the most bizarre thing at all. And it's very hard to talk about because as scientists, right, all of our training is we don't talk about Republicans and Democrats and liberals or conservatives. We're supposed to be beyond all that. But, I just don't know how to talk about it without talking about it. Somehow we have to uncouple the anti-science from far right-wing extremism. And it doesn't belong, and it's killing thousands of Americans. There's nothing intrinsically anti-science about the Republican Party. Lincoln started the National Academy of Sciences. Eisenhower started NASA. George W. Bush started PEPFAR. But what's happening now is sort of new and twisted, and it's un-American, and it's got to stop. Thank you. Ultimately, I feel the greatness of our nation is built on the backs of our great research universities, like those in Texas and Houston and the Texas Medical Center. Remember, we won World War II in part because of radar and the Manhattan Project. We won the Cold War. We're winning the war on AIDS because of science. My point here is that it's ultimately the scientists and the engineers who are the heroes, not the so-called army of patriots who sends me emails threatening me to hunt me down. We're the patriots. So, President, thank you. So, President, I really want to thank you for the invitation today and for inviting me here tonight and for the opportunity to speak to my Indian brothers and sisters. And I'll end with another statement from Gandhi who said, it's a trite saying that one half of the world knows not how the other half lives. Who can say what sores might be healed, what hurt solved, were the doings of each half of the world's inhabitants understood and appreciated by others. Now we're coming together and we're changing the world and overcoming the aggression. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much. So we have an elephant for Dr. Hotez to ride on his next trip to India too.
Thank you so much.